This morning, on our way to church here, we got on the highway. We live in Nampa. Surprise, surprise. We have a little bit of a drive to get here. And we got on the highway and we drove down the highway towards Mountain Home. And I don't know if you ever get something, like you see something out of the corner of your eye and it just kind of tips the scales, and so you start seeing them everywhere. But as we were driving down the highway, we saw on the opposite side going the other direction, a cop had a car pulled over. They were presumably speeding or something like that. But from that point forward, as we were driving through Boise and down to here in Mountain Home, we just seemed to see cops everywhere, including in my rearview mirror. And I don't know if you've ever had that unsettling feeling of a cop or the flashing lights in your rearview mirror, but in that you have a choice, an opportunity cost, as it were, because you look down at the speedometer and you say, well, I kind of was going maybe a little bit over the speed limit, but are they really going to pull you over for like maybe less than 5 miles an hour over? You have the option of getting over and just kind of slowing down, not putting the brake light on to give any indication that you were going fast, but you can kind of just coast down to the speed. Or you can speed up and you can try to get away, or you can try to get off at the next exit and hope that they didn't see you or weren't going after you. And for some strange reason, I have no idea why, their cop, we saw it first going the other direction, a cop just basically just blazing along with his lights flashing. And then 2 times cops with their lights flashing passed us. And it's one of those times that you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief. But at the same time, in those decisions, as we drove down here, there's plenty of times for opportunity cost, because as we arrived down and we reached the signs that say Mountain Home, we have another opportunity cost, because we could get off at exit 90 and drive through town to get here. We could stay on the highway. We could get off at exit 95 and just come just down the road right out here and straight here. Or we could be adventurous, and I'm not sure if there's an exit past this, but I think there might be one exit past this, and we could actually, if we missed this exit, we could even grab the next exit and kind of weave our way back up here. And with each of those choices, there's an opportunity cost, a little bit of gas saved, little bit of, or spent, saved or spent, little bit of different scenery that we would go past. But with each of those decisions, we kind of have to weigh, is that decision going to be good in the scope of what we want to do? As I was thinking about the idea for talking about this opportunity cost, which is the way of saying with every decision that you make, there's a cost involved. What are you choosing not to do if you choose to do this? Or what do you choose not to do if you're doing this, or vice versa? And I could think of no better way than playing a game with you guys, as we've determined, called opportunity cost. Because as you know, when you choose a door, you're also not choosing the other doors. On the first week, which was 3 weeks ago, I believe, we opened up door number 1, which revealed a fish. And we talked about how the devil likes to lure us into traps, and he slowly sets traps up, and he tries to bait us into getting into a trap. 2 weeks ago, we opened up door number 2, much to Faye's disappointment because she picked door number 3. But we opened up door number 2 to reveal how sleeping and my falling back asleep when I probably shouldn't have, and almost missing my vacation or band trip my senior year. And if you guys are ready, cheer, say it's about time. Are you ready to open door number 3? I know it is about time. So let's open door number 3. Door number 3 reveals a pile of rocks. A pile of rocks. I don't know why it's such a letdown. Like, What were you expecting to be behind door number 3? It's kind of one of those open-ended things. But when I see this picture of a pile of rocks, it kind of makes me think a little bit about goal setting in just the different areas of your life. And if you've done any reading or heard any expert talk about goal setting, they'll say there's usually anywhere from 5 to 7 main areas of your life that you want to set goals in or that you want to prioritize in. You have God, good goal, good thing to focus on. You have friends, you have work, you've got health. You always kind of want to keep your health in mind because that kind of deteriorates. Family, finances. How many of you finances is a big thing? I know that for my wife and I, with a baby on the way, finances is a big thing. But the thing with goal setting, and you have your mind is the other thing, and work. And with goal setting, you kind of want to set all of these goals in. You start just kind of piling stuff up, and I've got goals for this. I've got goals for this. Ooh, I need to spend some time with friends. Oh, but I don't really need to, I kind of need to do something with work. And pretty soon, you're not really able to do a whole lot because you're so tied into goals. You're tied into, I need to be doing this. I need to be doing that. And don't worry, friends are still important. I got you covered. But with all of these things in place, you kind of aren't able to focus very well on one of these things because you're trying to you're trying to just have all of your attention is split. And that's the downside or the negatives with how most of us think about goal setting. But if you look at the Bible, and if you look about what Jesus taught, Jesus, kind of dusty, Jesus had some thoughts about goal setting, and he had some thoughts about the idea of the rocks and the idea of putting things, prioritizing things and putting things first. And if you still have your Bibles open, flip back to our scripture reading because I want to bring out a key idea that Jesus adds to this idea of goals and see if there's something that we can apply to our own lives. This is Luke chapter 12, and we're going to look at starting at verses 22. Luke 12, starting with verse 22. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will eat, about your body, what you will wear. Life is more important than food, and the body is more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom nor barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, like adding just an hour, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the lilies grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these." Solomon being the king at the height of the Israelite empire. No one was more wealthier in the entire world than Solomon at that time. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and thrown in the fire tomorrow, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. It seems as though, let's pause for a moment, that God is saying, I know about all these things. This is all of what the pagan world is running after, but don't worry about all that stuff. And in my mind, I kind of say, what are you talking about? Kind of have to have money to do stuff. I kind of need to work on my mind. A job's important. If you've ever been without a job, you know how important a job is. But Jesus here is saying it's not the key thing. And he's about ready to give us a clue into what he sees and what he thinks about goals and putting things in priorities. Verse 31, he says, "But seek his kingdom," and he's talking about God, "and all these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom." Seek the kingdom first, and all these other things will be added to you. Jesus has a slightly different way of looking at this, because Jesus, it's not a bunch of little rocks. Instead, it's one big rock. Woo. And that big rock is more important than all of these other little rocks. We see this in Jesus' teaching, but can we see this played out in Jesus' life? Turn a few chapters before and go to Luke chapter 4. And remember that when we were talking about the traps that Jesus faced, the temptations in the desert, he put God first. But we're going to look a little bit after that to another event in Jesus' life and see if Jesus carried this idea of putting the kingdom first, putting his relationship with God above everything else. Luke 4, and we're going to start in verse 38. Jesus left the synagogue and went to the home of Simon. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, so they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over and rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up at once and began to wait on them. When the sun was setting, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. Moreover, demons came out of many people, shouting, "You are the Son of God!" But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak, because they knew he was the Christ. At daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. The people were looking for him, and when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving them. But he said, "I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns also, because that is why I was sent." And he kept on preaching in the synagogues of Judea. We have the situation. Jesus is kind of getting a little bit more popular, and he goes to Simon's mother-in-law's place. He heals her of a fever, and word gets around. And that night, lots of people, as the house was crowded with people, and Jesus was healing and healing and healing. But first thing in the morning, before anything else, Jesus gets up, goes off to a solitary place, and focuses on his relationship with God. If you read Mark's account of this, the disciples and the crowd is all looking around. They have no idea where Jesus went, and the disciples probably feel a little sheepish because we're supposed to be the ones following him, and we can't even find him. And once they find Jesus, they urge him, "Let's go back to the town. There's more people to be healed. There's more people to be healed." But Jesus says something a little bit shocking, at least in my mind. And he's like, "No, we're not going to go back there because I need to preach about the kingdom. I need to be in more places. I can't stay here because there's way more that my life's mission is than to just be here healing people." Jesus put his mission, put the kingdom of heaven and his relationship with the Father over healing people, as we saw. He put it over teaching people. We have great sermons, we have great teachings, but Jesus didn't come just for that reason. And Jesus even put his relationship in the kingdom over trying to teach and kind of rally together a band of somewhat misfits and disciples who just wouldn't get it. He kept on trying. He's like, "Need to do this. But what about this? You need to follow me. You need to trust God, and everything will come to you." But what are you talking about? You're going to die? That doesn't make sense. We have this idea of the Messiah. Well, that's what's going to happen. And up until the very end, it seems as though Jesus just couldn't get through to even his disciples. But with that said, Jesus wasn't here to heal people, to teach people, or to even train up a group of disciples. He was here because of the kingdom. He was here because of each one of us, because Jesus came to restore a relationship that was broken, that sin had broken. And that in and of itself is amazing. And as we see in Jesus' teaching, don't worry about all of the little things. Focus on the kingdom. Jesus wants that for us as well. The devil tries to tempt us and bait us into traps. He tries to lure us away with distractions. And oftentimes he succeeds. He also tries to lull us to sleep without making a plan, without thinking ahead of what we're going to do. And as we talked about the sleeping part, it's not a matter of if we're going to be lulled to sleep, it's a matter of when. Because the bridesmaids or the virgins fell asleep in Jesus' parable, all 10 of them, regardless of whether they were wise or foolish. Jesus fell asleep on the boat during the storm. Peter, James, and John, the elite, like the closest 3 disciples, they fell asleep. And so if we have this precedent in the Bible, we know that it's not a matter of if we're going to fall asleep, it's a matter of when. And so Satan has these 2 traps. And the thing that we need to always be alert and aware of so that we're not falling into these traps is with the rocks, but not a pile of rocks, with one big rock. One big rock, seeking God's kingdom first. And as we seek God's kingdom first, as we focus on our own personal relationships with God, he'll show us the traps. He'll give us a plan to keep us alert when we're awake and to bring us back when we've fallen asleep. And he'll help us with the other rocks in our lives. He'll help us focus where we need to focus. And it's as we're keeping him first. It's kind of a difficult thing to do. I know it's difficult for me, as I'm sure it's difficult to you, is how do we keep God first in our lives? And one thing that I found that works for me is modeling kind of what Jesus did. Because as we read in Luke 4, first thing in the morning, he got up, he went out to a solitary place, and he focused on his relationship with God. We don't really see exactly what he was doing, but we can imagine he was praying and having a conversation. We can imagine that he was like opening up a scroll that he might have had and looking at the Bible, looking at what had been written down up till that point. But it wasn't with an agenda or anything like that. He was just opening it up and saying, hey, God, what do you have for me? And in my own life, I found that when I start each morning putting God first, putting God's kingdom first, the rest of the day seems to go smoother. It's not like there's not problems. It's not like the devil doesn't throw distractions or try to get me sideswiped, but the day just seems to be oriented better. And so as we go away from here today, and as we put away our opportunity cost game, just remember with me that the devil tries to trap us. He tries to get us to fall asleep without a plan, but we're able to stay out of the devil's traps, and we're able to be awake and alert enough to see what the devil's doing when we place God and his kingdom first. Thank you.